Have you ever noticed that a brand new amplifier doesn't sound as good as you expected? That's because many amplifiers need time to settle before they reveal their true sound. In this video, we're explaining the 100-hour burn-in effect, why it happens, what actually changes inside an amplifier, and how this process can dramatically improve sound quality over time. Most people judge the Fosi Audio BT20A within the first 10 minutes, and that's the biggest mistake. Because after 100 hours of burn-in, this small Class D amplifier sounds noticeably more refined and balanced. The Fosi Audio BT20A is a perfect real-world example of how burn-in affects modern Class D amplifiers, especially in the budget category. Right out of the box, many listeners describe the BT20A as sounding slightly tight, a bit forward in the highs, and somewhat constrained in the soundstage. This is common with compact Class D amps that use new internal components and fresh circuitry. However, after 50 to 100 hours of continuous playback, the BT20A begins to noticeably settle into its true sound character. The treble smooths out, mid-range becomes more natural, and the overall presentation feels less mechanical and more cohesive. As the burn-in process continues, the biggest improvement is usually heard in bass control and dynamics. Early on, low frequencies can feel lean or slightly rigid, but with extended use, bass response tightens and gains better definition without becoming boomy. This makes the BT20A sound more confident and balanced, especially when paired with bookshelf speakers. The soundstage also opens up slightly after burn-in, giving instruments more space and improving stereo separation, something many users don't expect from a compact, budget-friendly amplifier. Vocals gain clarity and warmth, and music feels more relaxed rather than forced. What makes the Fosi Audio BT20A especially interesting for burn-in discussions is that it proves burn-in isn't limited to tube or high-end amplifiers. Even affordable Class D designs benefit from time and use as internal capacitors, output stages, and power components stabilize. By the time the BT20A crosses the 100-hour mark, it sounds more refined, less edgy, and far more enjoyable for long listening sessions. This is why many audiophiles recommend not judging this amplifier on day one. When given proper burn-in time, the Fosi Audio BT20A transforms from a good budget amp into a surprisingly musical and well-balanced performer, making it a strong example of how burn-in can genuinely influence sound quality in 2026. Most people listen to the Aiyima T9 Pro for just a few minutes. But after 50 to 100 hours of burn-in, this hybrid tube amp reveals a sound quality far richer than you'd expect. The Aiyima T9 Pro stands out in 2026 as a compelling example of how even hybrid tube amplifiers can benefit immensely from proper burn-in. Out of the box, the T9 Pro delivers a bright, slightly forward sound, energetic, clear, and impressive for casual listening. But that initial impression doesn't tell the full story. As the unit settles in over the first 50 to 100 hours of continuous playback, something interesting happens. The sound softens in all the right ways and begins to reveal its true musical character. Highs become less edgy and more refined, mids take on a richer, more hospitable texture, and the entire presentation feels more cohesive. Listeners often describe this shift as going from good to musical, because the amp starts to emphasize emotion and natural tonality over clinical precision. One area where the burn-in effect is most noticeable is in the mid-range clarity and instrumental separation. In early hours, complex mixes can sound a bit busy or slightly congested, but after significant burn-in time, the T9 Pro begins to articulate individual elements with ease. Vocals feel more lifelike, guitar strings have a smoother decay, and piano tones have more body. The bass response also tightens up, gaining depth and control without becoming overly boomy. This helps the amplifier feel balanced across genres, from jazz and acoustic to rock and electronic. The hybrid design, combining tube warmth with solid-state control, means you get the best of both worlds, tube-like musicality and reliable dynamic grip. Another reason audiophiles like the Aiyima T9 Pro after burn-in is how it interacts with speakers. Many users note that after extended use, the amp seems to open up, providing a wider soundstage and improved stereo imaging, allowing instruments to sit in space more naturally. This is especially true with efficient bookshelf speakers where detail and texture shine brightest. Because the T9 Pro doesn't rely purely on tubes, it avoids some of the noise and hiss that cheaper tube amps suffer from, while still capturing that organic, engaging sound quality that makes tubes desirable. Most people judge the Sony STR-DH190 within the first hour. But after 50 to 100 hours of burn-in, this classic stereo receiver reveals a fuller, smoother, and more musical personality. The Sony STR-DH190 has become one of the most recommended budget stereo receivers of its generation, not just because of its features, but because of how it evolves with use. Straight out of the box, the STR-DH190 sounds clean and detailed, but many listeners notice it can feel a bit rigid, with slightly forward highs and somewhat constrained mid-range. That first impression is normal with new analog circuitry and fresh components. However, after 50 to 100 hours of continuous play, something remarkable happens. The sound smooths out, the highs lose their edge, and the overall tonal balance becomes more natural and engaging. This process, often called burn-in, allows the circuitry and capacitors to settle, revealing a sound signature that feels richer and more complete than what you heard on day one. One of the most noticeable improvements after burn-in is in the mid-range warmth and vocal presence. Initially, vocals and acoustic instruments can come off a bit crisp or clinical, but with extended listening, they begin to take on a softer, more organic tonal weight. This makes songs sound less engineered and more like you're listening to a live performance. The bass also tightens, gaining better definition and control, especially noticeable on more demanding tracks where rhythm and timing matter. Combined with the widened soundstage that many users report after significant burn-in, music feels more immersive and relaxed rather than boxed in or rushed. What makes the Sony STR-DH190 especially interesting for audiophiles is that this evolution happens in a receiver that's affordable yet musically capable. Its built-in phono input makes it a hit among vinyl lovers, and the clean analog signal path means that once the components have warmed up, the unit delivers a surprisingly musical, room-filling sound that many budget amplifiers struggle to match. Because it doesn't rely on flashy digital features, the STR-DH190 lets pure sound quality shine through, and that quality becomes more evident as burn-in progresses. For many listeners, this transformation from good to great is exactly why tube and analog leaning gear, including this Sony model, remains relevant and beloved in 2020 SXS hi-fi landscape. At first, the Yamaha AS301 sounds precise and clean. But give it time, and this amplifier slowly transforms into something far more natural and musical. The Yamaha AS301 is known for its clarity, control, and classic Yamaha sound signature, but what many people don't realize is how much it benefits from proper burn-in. When brand new, the AS301 can sound slightly stiff, especially in the upper frequencies, with a presentation that feels very accurate but not fully relaxed. This is common with solid-state amplifiers that prioritize precision. However, after 50 to 100 hours of consistent playback, the amplifier begins to settle, revealing a smoother and more cohesive sound profile. High frequencies soften just enough to remove any sharpness, mids gain warmth and body, and the overall tonal balance feels more inviting. As burn-in progresses, the soundstage noticeably opens up. Instruments feel better separated, and music gains a sense of depth that wasn't present during the first few listening sessions. Vocals become fuller and more natural, while guitars and piano notes carry a more realistic decay. Bass response also improves, not by becoming louder, but by gaining better definition and control. This makes the AS301 feel more confident and dynamic, especially when paired with bookshelf or mid-size floor-standing speakers. The amp no longer sounds tight or restricted. Instead, it flows with the music in a way that encourages longer listening sessions. What makes the Yamaha AS301 such a great example for the burn-in discussion is its neutral foundation. Because the amp starts out very clean and transparent, the changes introduced by burn-in are easier to notice. After extended use, the AS301 balances accuracy with musicality, a combination many audiophiles look for in a reliable, everyday amplifier. In 2026, this evolution is exactly why listeners who value natural tone and long-term listening comfort continue to choose amplifiers like the Yamaha AS301, proving that patience can genuinely unlock better sound. Ever wondered why an amplifier doesn't sound its best straight out of the box? With the Denon PMA-600NE, the real magic begins after proper burn-in. The Denon PMA-600NE is a well-regarded integrated amplifier, but what many listeners don't realize is how much its sound improves after around 100 hours of burn-in. When brand new, the PMA-600NE can sound slightly tight and reserved, especially in the bass and mid-range. As the internal components settle, including capacitors, power supply, and analog circuitry, the sound gradually opens up, becoming smoother, fuller, and more natural. After extended listening time, the bass gains better depth and control, the mid-range becomes warmer and more expressive, and the highs smooth out, losing any early sharpness or dryness. This burn-in process is especially noticeable on the PMA-600NE because of its carefully tuned analog design and Denon's focus on musical balance. Vocals start to sound more lifelike, instruments gain better separation, and the overall soundstage feels wider and more relaxed. Whether you're listening to vinyl through its phono stage or digital sources via the built-in DAC, the amplifier begins to deliver a more cohesive and engaging presentation after sufficient use. Music flows more naturally, making longer listening sessions far more enjoyable. By the time the Denon PMA-600NE crosses the 100-hour mark, it truly shows its intended character, clean, warm, and musical without losing detail. This is a perfect example of why burn-in matters, especially for amplifiers designed for serious music lovers. If you give it time to settle, the PMA-600NE rewards you with sound quality that clearly improves, proving that patience can make a real difference in how good your system ultimately sounds. So if your amplifier doesn't sound perfect on day one, don't rush to judge it. Give it time, let the components settle, and you may be surprised by how much smoother, warmer, and more detailed the sound becomes. If you found this burn-in explanation helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow BySite for more honest audio tips, reviews, and buying guides.